Okay, hello, and welcome to our weekly free consulting sessions. We have our team here, and we're just going to dive right in with Asal taking over. Asal, please do.
Hi everyone. So as you know, this series we're going over RIOS 2016, the Recycling Industry Operating Standard. And today we are on deck. We have section 1.3, document and record control. So I'm going to open the standard if everyone can see that. And let's dive in. The RIOS management system developed by recyclers shall A, be maintained in a paper or electronic format. B, establish documentation where required by the RIOS standard or necessary for the operation of the RIOS management system. C, provide a direction to related documentation necessary to conform to the requirements of RIOS. And D, establish records as required by RIOS or to demonstrate conformance with the requirements of RIOS.
Okay, so this one is the overview to the control of documents and control of records, the whole process. And A is pretty self-explanatory. B,
we can't hear you.
Establish documentation. What?
I think we're having trouble hearing Mike, right?
You can't hear me?
There is a sound issue, yeah. So maybe when you can just switch mutes.
All right, so let me start over again. Is that much better? All right, so like I said, A is pretty self-explanatory. B, establish documentation where required by the RIOS standard. So what that means is there's parts of the standard, like you'll see in 1.3.1, where it says RIOS recyclers shall establish written plans. So if it's specifically called out, then you need to have documentation, and if it's necessary for the operation of the management system. So that means where it's necessary for you to have a documented process in place to ensure that the processes are carried out in accordance with the quality, environmental, health, and safety requirements inherent in the RIOS standard. So that's up to the discretion of the recycler of what they can document. But if you don't have something that's pretty key documented, you should be prepared for good justification with the auditor of why you don't have it documented. Provide direction to related documentation necessary to conform to the requirements of RIOS. So this is kind of like a cross-reference. You often will have times, and it could be in your manual, in your interaction of processes, on the document itself, or some other area where you point to how the processes are interrelated and kind of the different, like you might have RIOS 3, footprint procedure. And then under the footprint procedure, you might have RIOS 3 F1, legal and other requirements, RIOS 3 F2, aspects and important impacts, RIOS 3 F3, hazards and important risks. So that might be a way that you would structure it, and those things are related there. And establish records as required by RIOS or to demonstrate conformance with the requirements of RIOS. So that's pretty evident there that you need to have a process for establishing records and keeping records that are required by the RIOS management system standard, as well as any other ones that are pertinent to your own organization. Now I will mute myself.
All righty. Okay, so that was kind of the overview of the control of documents and records. So now let's dive into like specifically control of documents. Recyclers shall establish written plans to ensure that all documents within the RIOS management system are established and maintained, include information to uniquely identify, describe, and control the document through revisions, legible and dated, approved prior to use, available in improved formats, current and available at the point of use, protected from loss, reviewed, revised, and updated as necessary with changes controlled, removed from use when obsolete, and if kept for any purpose, clearly identified as obsolete, and identified and distribution controlled if from external providers.
Okay, so the first thing here is establish a written plan. So this means that this process requires you to have a written plan or procedure or some type of unmute. Sorry. Okay, so I said, first of all, this requires some type of written plan to govern this process. So that means you have to have something in place here to kind of ensure that this document is, or this process is carried out as intended. So the first thing that you want to say, and it's a plan. So think about the plan, do, check, act model. So you have your written plan, which says what this process is, and then you establish and maintain. So you create procedures for your RIOS management system. And on those procedures, you include unique identifiers like RIOS 3, which is the footprint procedure. And that describes what the procedure is. And that RIOS 3 footprint procedure may say on the bottom, revision 1 dated 2/2021 or whatever the date is, right? And then it has to be legible and dated. So if you have that control bar typed electronically on the bottom, of course you can keep paper documents if you want to, but who does nowadays, and approve prior to use. So the approval doesn't necessarily have to be on the document. It could be on the document itself. It could say on the bottom control bar, approved by, the health and safety manager or whatever, whoever is in a position to approve the documents. Or you could have the approval noted elsewhere. You might have a documented master list of documents and changes and approvals and various other ways to approve it. So it gives you the ability to, whatever way, you have to have approval prior to use. And it's available in the approved format. So that could be either paper or electronic, and current and available at the point of use. So this is an important part because this means that it needs to be accessible to people who use that document. The people who are out in the yard doing the actual work. So if it's a procedure that's related to really important safety aspects of a job that they're doing on a daily basis, but they have no access to it, that's buried away in the office of the health and safety officer for the time when the RIOS audit comes, then it doesn't really do them any use or doesn't give them any benefit. So having it available at the point of use doesn't mean you have to have computers at every single station in the yard, but at least there has to be a process to know that there is the availability to get that documentation, and that should be communicated to each of the respective workers so that they know where to get it. And it might be in the office, in the break room, or from a supervisor or some other means that's available to all the workers. Protected from loss, so doing backups, making sure that you don't have just your RIOS system on one computer hard drive and not in the cloud or not backed up on any of your servers or anything like that. Reviewed, revised, and updated as necessary with changes controlled. So, usually I think a lot of things in terms of management systems, if it says something like reviewed, revised, updated as necessary, the reasonable thing is to probably do it at least annually to make sure that your management system is in place. It's not a requirement of the standard, albeit. However, that's something that is probably reasonable, and the auditor may look for it too. So you want to make sure that you have that. And then there may be a benefit to saving obsolete versions, so that if you need to revert back to doing things the way that you were doing them before, if something doesn't work out, or if you want for reference to see what the changes were made. But if you do keep obsolete documents, you have to make sure that they're removed from use when they're obsolete and then clearly identified. So have that folder and then make sure that it's not accessible to people so that they're going to get obsolete versions. So you have to have some kind of control over the obsolete versions to make sure that it's not accessible to everyone, and identified and distribution control if from external parties. So there might be certain things like a manual for a baler or some other types of things that are distributed by external parties, like the manufacturer of that baler, that you might want to keep as part of your management system. That's part of your preventive maintenance, as part of the health and safety. It might have, you know, the ways to lock out and tag out, or the ways to prevent the hazardous energy from being on in times of maintenance. So you want to make sure that you have those external documents controlled as well and set aside. So
I wanted to try that. I wanted to raise my hand. Is it Mike? I just wanted to raise my hand when you were done. If you're done. Okay. So yeah, so I have a couple of comments and then I have a question for Mike. One comment, so I'm going to take it off. Okay, so one comment, the first comment has to do with documents being available at the yard, right? So we can have, we don't have to have printouts. We can actually just have one computer central station that everybody knows where that is. Or like Mike said, you can actually have the manuals printed and a couple of those copies throughout the yard. Second thing that I wanted to comment on has to do with a document management software that quite often replaces one, document master list, two, need to document change history within the document, and to note the approvers on the document. Because if you have a document control management system software, it should generally account for that. Most of the software also actually has an ability where you can generate a document change request or document change order. It's called DCO. And then that goes through the whole entire process. So some of these softwares that are out there already account for all of the ISO or RIOS or AAS or R2 requirements for document control in terms of numbering, the history, approvals, document listing. Now, Mike, I have a question. I'm an auditor. I'm in the yard. I am asking sorter, so he or she, hopefully she, one of these days, is sorting metal. And I'm asking her, can you please tell me, how do you know which metal goes where, number one, and how do you know, or how do you distinguish between various grades of metals? So I'm just gonna throw that out there for you.
So that's kind of broad, because
okay, sorry. So how about this? She tells me I've been trained on it. I've been, you know, and I ask that I've been trained on it. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I'm like, okay, so how about you decide to go on a month-long vacation because you get, you know, I don't know, you accumulate all of your vacation days and you come back and you need a refresher. Where would you go to find the information about different grades of metal?
So what's her answer?
I want you to tell me what are acceptable things. Like how would an organization control that? Because you can either have an internal document or an external document, right? Or a training material. So
yeah, I
right.
mean, if it's it could be an external document they're sorting to ISRI specs or something like that.
But what if she keeps just telling me, well, I just know.
Then that
and then I proceed to talk to the management representative and ask, do you have any documents that define what the metal is? And they don't even reference any ISRI standards.
So then that could be a nonconformity to probably in terms of you're going to go further down in terms of customer requirements, like defining the specification and outside provider requirements, or product requirements, including applicable legal requirements and customer requirements for acceptable. So you need to know and define what criteria you're sorting stuff to according to the consuming facilities, requirements.
Right, but so what I'm getting at,
I
right?
think this goes to kind of various parts of the RIOS standard, but one of it is like the documents that are required for the RIOS Recycler to have are the documents that are required by the standard, but also documents that are required in order to carry out the operations, right? And one of something that may be required is a cross-reference sheet on how to tell what type of metal goes into which grade. And that could be internally made, or that could be an external document. And so I think for the recycler to keep in mind is that if there's something like this that defines how to do your job, then the person who's doing that job should be able to know that it exists and be able to access it when they need to, or during an audit.
Asal, you're reading.
So yeah, I think that's what Maya's trying to get at. Would I write a nonconformity if they didn't have a document for sorting here? And yes, probably, because they need to have one to show the
Well, the thing is, no, for sorting is fine. Sorting is like, okay, you sort different types of metals in different types of bins depending on what they're labeled, right? But my specific question is about, if we go to ISO 9001, knowledge of the organization, right? So the knowledge of the organization can come from different places, right? So it can come from internal, or it can come from the external requirement or external definition or industry definition of different types of grades of metals, right? So like in RIOS, when you're talking about customer requirements, I'm assuming that whoever is sorting already has access to whatever it is that they receive when they're sorting, because they have access to the work order, let's say, right? But then my specific question goes to exactly to what Asal was talking about, right? Is what are the operational documents and where would they be, and what are the different ways that we can have them? Another way that you can kind of turn this into this organizational knowledge into operation is by having a board where you have different types of metals, and underneath them you have labels, right? Kind of what we see in our two facilities. We have like a picture of a CRT saying this is a CRT, it has leaded glass. This is a light bulb, it has potentially have or mercury, well, it depends what kind of light bulb it is, right? That, this is an LCD, this is a battery, this is this type of battery, that type of battery. So a lot of visuals can also happen. So I guess, and I've witnessed this in a lot of recycling yards, right? Because everybody's been there for so many years, so I just know. And the answer is like, well, I just know what grade metal this is, right? But there should be some kind of a connection between how long they've been there, the training they have received, and where is this documented, right? Because again, we want to maintain the integrity of the system. So that's just the question, how, if I am a RIOS recycler, what are the different ways that I could document this, right? So you can have available your ISRI standards. You can actually create your own reference sheet like Asal was talking about, or we can have this reference board in the operation depending in which department I'm in. So that's kind of what I was getting at, because I have come across a lot of these issues where I've been in the industry so long, I just know the difference between honey and whatever. So yeah.
I think that there's also a good point in the note below. It says control documents include a variety of format. Each is formally and deliberately organized into a plan, procedure, standard, operating procedure, work instruction, graphical flow chart, forms, etc. So depending on what is necessary for that particular process, It might be, like you said, a graphical flow chart of all the different types of metal. They may be dealing with copper and might have those things, honey and berry and all those sweet sounding names that make you hungry like Pooh Bear. All right.
All righty. So control of records. A, recyclers shall establish written plans to ensure that all records within the RIOS management system are established and maintained, legible, identifiable, traceable to the pertinent process, and readily retrievable, and stored and protected from damage or loss. B, record retention times shall be established in writing and be consistent with relevant stakeholder and legal requirements.
Okay, so this is another instance where it specifically says have a written plan in place. So this is a required document of the RIOS standard, and you have to have a process documented that establishes how you're going to keep these records, how you're going to keep records and maintain records, how you're going to ensure legibility, because we all know that when you put a form out into the yard, everyone's handwriting is completely understandable, and you could definitely read that when you scan it in on a computer with pencil scratch all over it. So you need to have the ability to keep records that are going to be legible, that tell you something, because otherwise there's no point to that record. If it doesn't have any value, and you're just keeping it for the sake of having the record, but it doesn't tell you anything at all. And then records should be identifiable. So a lot of times records are going to be on documents that are controlled. So if they have a control bar, then it's going to be traceable to what document it is and the pertinent process. Readily retrievable is important. This is something that kills auditors. You ask for a record and it takes 30 minutes to pull up something that should be given to you in a minute. If that happens like 5 or 6 times, you're probably going to get a nonconformity for this particular section, that records were not readily retrievable. So 5 or 6, I have more patience. Another auditor might do it after the first time or second time. So it depends. That might be a major nonconformity if it happens 5 or 6 times. And stored and protected from damage or loss. So this all depends on whether it's paper or electronic, right? If it's paper, it should be in some type of cabinet that's fireproof or stored in a place that's not going to be damaged. Or if it's electronic, you have to ensure that you have a system for backups and ensuring that data that you're storing does not get lost. Record retention time shall be established in writing and consistent with relevant stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders here? The stakeholders can be employees, they can be customers, you know, SDS requirements for having, 30 years or something like that. I forget the exact time frame, but there's various things, as well as training records of employees and medical records or incident reports. And then customer requirements. Customers may have requirements for you that for records to be kept 7 years or however long, whatever the period is, and then legal requirements. So the legal requirements were the ones I was talking about before about, you know, the medical records or incident reports, how long those have to be kept, as well as SDS and other various things, training records and other stuff related to employment records of that particular employee. So those things have to be recorded in writing somehow and established to show how long you're retaining records and which records are retained for longer according to stakeholder or legal requirements.
I have a question with regards to readily retrievable. How far back is an auditor kind of like allowed to go when they're looking at records? So like typically, when I do an internal audit, for example, I go back to maybe the past audit cycle right? So between my last internal audit and this internal audit, maybe 2 audit cycles back. But for like, if you're getting certified, how far back can they go? And what if my archive process is to like put it in a box and take it off site, you know? And so then that's not readily retrievable because somebody has to go to get it and dig through the box and find it. So yeah, that's my question. So how far back do auditors typically go when they're looking at records?
I would say usually 1 audit cycle, but in the case of a recertification audit, you could go back 3 years, you know, and expect them to have records to show conformance. I know we're not talking about R2 now, but bill of ladings are expected to be kept for 3 years. So if you're doing a recert audit and you ask for a bill of lading that's 3 years old, you should be able to show that, and also that it went to an approved downstream vendor at that time.
Okay. So I guess that's a good rule of thumb for if you're listening out there and you're thinking about implementing a standard or thinking about what should my record control procedure be. I guess a good rule of thumb is at least have them readily retrievable for 3 years. And then if you will have to archive them and keep them for 7 years or 10 years because of legal purposes or client requirements, then you can do it at that time, maybe.
And then I guess I want to comment on that and say also that it depends on the auditor. And it depends on the status of the, like, how does the audit begin? How does the audit progress? And it also depends on how many years have you had the certification. So let's say I'm just now getting my RIOS, I'm really expected only to have 3 months of the record. So I could just go to those 3 months, right? Now, if, like you said, we work with clients year to year to year, so we will look at least a year or 2 of record retention to assess the effectiveness. And we do that because we are usually with the client continuously, right? Now, if I have a standard, if I have a certification for 6+, 10+ years, then really, depending on the auditor, you are responsible for whatever your record retention says. So if I'm auditing you and you say that you are keeping all of your customer order information for 7 years, then I will be asking where these are, and I'm going to get asked samples for it. No, I'm not saying I will do it. I'm just saying it as an example. So now in that case, in terms of the retention and something being off in a box off site, then your actual record retention process needs to say that the records are packed away and put on an off-site approved vendor for storage, for safekeeping for X amount of years, right? And they can be retrievable within 2 days, right? So now if I have a 5-day audit with you and I ask you for these records of the first day, I expect that on day 3, I will be able to review those records. So I just wanted to kind of like point that out because it really is like everything else in RIOS and like every other ISO standard, right? It all depends on circumstances.
Any final thoughts about document control and record control? Thank you for answering that question, Maya. I think that was a really good guidance on when you're setting up your record system to keep those types of considerations in mind. Any closing thoughts on doc control from you guys? Cool. All right, well.
The only thing I want to say when it comes to record control, not document control,
sorry,
record control, if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Yep.
It's never enough to say that over and over again. Repeat it again.
That's our mantra. We tell that every time to if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So, yeah. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Please join us next week, same time, same place. We're going to go to the next section of RIOS. We're going to talk about the RIOS policy. So that's going to be an important section. Also, if you need further guidance on RIOS, you can always email us at info@glenviewgroup.com or call us. And if you are looking to implement a RIOS and R2 combined management system, please sign up for our master class. It's for June 7th to 11th, 2021. It's completely virtual like this. And you will get just a very hands-on guidance. We're going to go through each section of standard, dissect it, and give you the documents that you need to create and set up your management system, and also how to do internal audits and supplier audits. So please sign up for that. We're limited to 15 seats, and they're going to sell out fast. So thank you guys for joining us. See you next time.